Hi everyone on YouTube, thank you so much for watching my videos, for commenting, I really appreciate it. So today's video is a little bit different, so we'll go back to the mermaid very soon, but at the moment this video is about something I did over Christmas on Patreon, and I wanted to make some faces that were a mold basically of one face, and the face I wanted to challenge where I sculpted a face from no reference. So there's no measuring. I'm not starting from the profile as I usually would. And I was going to do it as a ball on a stick, like a lot of people do, which I've done in the past, but it's not my usual way now, but it's kind of quite a nice challenge to do something out of your comfort zone. But then I decided to do it on a piece of wood. So I made an inside of foil for the head, slightly smaller than the actual head would be, so that there's enough clay on the head over the foil to make it strong. You wouldn't want the foil to be so big that the clay over the top was so thin. So you probably want at least 3 millimeters of clay, I would say, maybe. So I was going for that. I made indentations where the eyes will be, and then I sort of roughly marked out where the nose and the mouth will be. And all of this, none of this is with reference. So I'm thinking about it in my head. I'm very inspired at the moment by the Pop Mart and the Skull Panda. I don't know if you've seen them. If you haven't, look them up. They're amazing. I just love the way they look. So I wanted something that was my inspiration of that. So not the same, but mine, but inspired by. So I was going for something cute and young. I'm using some very old clay that I had. It's probably about 4 years old. So I decided, because it's not anything serious, I'll just use some old clay. Would I use that clay again? No. Because it was a glittery clay, which I thought would be quite nice. But I realized that the glitter, because there's glitter in the clay, when you try to smooth it out, it doesn't give you the super smooth finish that I would have liked. It looks nice and it's fine, but it's not as super smooth as I'd want it, the finish at the end. But it is fine. It's just for fun. So I just built it up. What was nice is I was sculpting eyes that I knew I was going to cut out. So there's no having to line up the eyes at this point, the eyes moving while you're still sculpting, all that kind of thing. That was not a problem. So I've not often sculpted eyes without a solid ball, so that was quite a challenge as well. But I just kind of made a shape of an eye and then used my tools to define the whole thing. So the clay I used, as I say, was old. I used some, it was quite tough. It was really quite tough. And it almost cracked in some places. Well, it had cracked in some places while it was sitting in the bag that I'd mixed it and then put it into. So I used some CERNIT oil to make it softer, which works really well. I used to use Mix Quick, then one time when I tried to get some, they didn't have any, so I got the CERNIT oil, but it works just as well. It's good. So I used that. The clay mix that I use at the moment, have used for the last, probably more than 10 years. I love this mix. And whenever I go off and I try something else, I always come back to my mix of clay. And I won't deviate from it these days. It's been a long time since I even tried anything else because I learned my lesson. It's the best. Well, for me anyway. Everyone's different, so don't try it. That's the best thing. That's why I say is try everything of what anyone else does, and then you'll find your best. So for me, this is my best. So it's a 50-50 mix of the main part of the clay. So it's FIMO, professional doll clay, and CERNIT flesh. 50-50 of each of those mixed together, then about 10% of an opaque white, can be any brand, either FIMO or CERNIT. I use quite a bit of white in mine. So the theory behind using the opaque white is actually something Deb Wood taught me very many years ago, which is if you add the opaque white, it hides blemishes that might come to the surface otherwise when it's baking, like what they would call moonies, where it's trapped air. It comes out and it leaves a little mark where it sort of escapes from the clay. The opaque white helps with that a lot. It really does. I use a lot of opaque white because I like that opaque finish on the skin. I don't really like the translucent look, mostly because I think the paint looks better on it. but that's just a preference of mine. So even you could even use a very much smaller amount of the opaque white if you wanted to. Then when it comes to baking my mix of clay, I would always, oh, before I say that, also I use a little bit of mixed quick, but at the moment I'm using the oil as well. So that would depend on how whether your clay is very fresh and therefore very soft, or whether your clay is hard. If your clay is hard, you could use a bit of the oil, either the oil or mixed quick. So I use that in the mix. Then when it comes to baking, I use the temperature of the CERNIT, because CERNIT has a higher temperature of curing than the FIMO does. So for CERNIT it's 130 degrees, for FIMO it's 110. So use the 130 degrees. I also bake for an hour mostly for everything I do, but that's the final bake. The in-between bakes I usually bake for about 40 minutes. But anyway, that's a whole other story. But that's what I just wanted to say. With the clay mix, it's always the same, and something I feel very strongly about. I've tested out others, and for me, that mix is the best. So going back to the face we're working on at the moment. So I smoothed it out. Once I'd smoothed it out, I think, yeah, sometimes I do this where I'll smooth a lot of what I've done out, and then I'll go back in again. So if you do that ever with your head or wherever, leave it for a couple of minutes just so that the clay can firm up again, and so that the surface is quite dry again. It only takes a couple of minutes especially if you're using a white spirit, it'll dry up a lot quicker than something like oil if you're using oil to smooth. Once I had done that, I realized that I actually wanted the eyes to be even bigger. So that's one of the good things about not having eyes already. I mean, I've done that many times too. You could take the eyes out and you could put in some bigger eyes if you were actually inserting eyes while you're sculpting. But in this case, I didn't have to do that. I just made the eye bigger. And then I added a little bit of eyelid. So once I've added the eyelids, I'm just going to use my little brushes and tools. Brushes, as I've said before, are really good to be used as tools as well, because they're a softer version of a tool. So you can still press against them, make indentations, and you'll just get a softer result. And then I'm going to use my white spirit, otherwise known as mineral spirit, depends on where you are in the world, to smooth everything out. Then after the bake of 40 minutes, I then take it out the oven, remove all of the foil and cut away some of the clay so that it's ready. So when you're cutting away the clay, just thinking about that's your final result. So when you take a mold, that is what you're going to get. So any clay there might be too much clay, just remove it, because at this point, this is your master copy. So smooth it, make it exactly how you want it to be before you mold it. Once it's ready for the mold, I put it back on the wood and I made some keys out of blue tack. It was just what I had around. Added some baby powder. Corn flour will work just as well. And then added my Pebeo, in this case, 2-part silicone. So I just mix it. Once it's mixed, you've got 5 minutes to get it on, so you've got to be quite quick. Once it was set, then just remove it from the mold and remove the keys, and then put some more powder on and add the second layer, so you make a lid for it really. Once that's done, I took my original clay that I'd made the first head with, and I mixed some oil, so extra oil, into it to make it very sticky, because I wanted it to be able to squash into all of the areas. So I don't think polymer is the best thing to use for a 2-part mold like that, because it is quite resistant. It's not soft. It's not like a air dry clay where it will just squash easily into the crevices. So it wasn't ever going to be the best thing to use, but this again just for fun, so it didn't matter. So I made it as soft as I could. Then I pushed that into the mold. Then there were a few areas, there were some marks, some areas where the clay had not managed to go or the air had got trapped. So once I had molded 2 of the same head, so I did the process twice, it was ready for drilling out the eyes. So I drilled them out first with a small drill through the middle of the eye, and then I just used my knife to cut very carefully the rest of the eye out. I used my Dremel again at the back, so I'd used my Dremel for the little hole that I made in the middle, and then I used to drill out the back. So you need to drill out the back so that you can push the eye that you've made, the resin eye, in. You need a hollow at the back. So then it was time to paint. So I started with the tones, so it's shadow tones of the clay that I used for the head. So just mixing a color that is not too dark and not too light. If it's too light, it will look chalky on the clay, and if it's too dark, it will have streaks. So it's really getting that right tone of shadow that will look right on the clay. Trial and error. Painting the eyes around the eyeball, so putting the pink in, all the things that would make the eye look alive, obviously without the eyes in yet. And some blush. And darkening the area where the eyelashes will be. Painting some eyelashes on the bottom. And then it came to sculpting the hair. I was going to sculpt the hair before I molded the face, and I forgot. But I'm glad I forgot, because that meant that I could do each one with different hair. So once that was done, I added some eyes. And then for the second head, everybody on Patreon, they had a chance to vote on what they would like their second head to look like. And the vote that came out the most was a natural look with freckles and auburn hair. So I had a few options. I had auburn hair, natural look with freckles. I also had a dark gothic type of theme. I thought of bright colours. I can't remember what the others were. Oh, there was a pastel fairy-like. That came second. So the one that won was the natural look. I'm painting on the freckles. I always spatter the freckles on in layers, starting with a maybe lighter freckle, then getting a bit darker. In between each layer, setting it once I'm happy with the freckles. So if you see some that are too big or in the wrong place, take those off with a tiny brush and some mineral spirit, just remove them. Once I'm happy with where the freckles are, set it with an embossing gun, then do the second layer and a third layer if you want them, just until you're happy with what you've got. Adding a few extra with my brush. And then I just added some colour to the mouth. And then it was time. So once that was done, I didn't bake it in the oven, but I set it made sure that every bit of that paint was set before I went to add the clay hair, because the clay could potentially take the paint off the head. So I'm not sure if it would or not. I just to be safe, definitely set it as much as you can with an embossing gun before you go and add more clay. You don't want to mess up the area that you've just done, especially if you've got to put your hands on it. Even if you're wearing a glove, it's still going to potentially rub the paint. So doesn't need to be in the oven unless you wanted to. You could bake it for 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes if you wanted to, but otherwise just set it with an embossing gun. And for this hair, I thought, let's give her a fringe and a sort of bob style hair. Very influenced by the Skull Pandas. Just giving a suggestion of the roughness of the hair, not trying to sculpt every individual hair. I think that would just look very messy. So try to get it so just giving it a suggestion. Then painting with some auburn paint and some highlights, and then just finishing it off like I did the first one with some eyelashes at the bottom. And I started with the green eyes, but they were a bit big, so I went with the blue eyes that I had. I didn't have any green. Would have been nice with green, but might have been too much green, considering that I put her on a green background. So then I made a little cushion thing with some batting and some green fabric that I had, and then I glued her on. I wanted the effect to look a little bit like she was wearing a bonnet, so I put a bow at the bottom. Fabric tack is your best friend when it comes to gluing fabric. I love it. It dries quite quickly, but there's enough time for you to adjust things before it sets really solid. Then I added some varnish to their eyes just to make them shine a little bit more. And the last thing is some felt on the back, and then a pin just to make them into pins. So there's the two finished. I did the same to the first head. So these are the two pins that we ended up making. The second one was very much voted for by my patrons. Maybe in the comments, if you would leave me some ideas of what you would have done with those heads, because the idea that came second in the Patreon vote was for a pastel fairy-like face, and I really want to do that in the future. So I think that if I have some time at some point, I would love to do another video like this. And if you have any ideas, because the pastel fairy did get second, and I really would like to do that. It's got me thinking about what I could do with that. So I think I'll definitely do that in the future. And it would be nice to do two again. So if you have any ideas, please write them in the comments. Have a wonderful 2026, and thank you again for watching my videos and for subscribing. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you again soon. Bye. So this is my front page, my welcome page on my Patreon. And if you go into collections, it'll bring you to all of the projects that I have posted about over the years. So there's 8 years of projects here. Just scroll through them. There's a lot of different things. They're the basics. So some of the very old stuff will be more of like work in progress, so not really detailed. But amongst these work in progress, there is also videos on how to sculpt shoes, how to sculpt roses, how I attach viscose hair, things like that, sculpting a dress. Then the real basics like baking in stages. I ear tutorial, basic foot tutorials, another one about how I bake. There's a tutorial that is on YouTube as well about hands, but there's also a tutorial here about armature, so the real basics of how I would build my armatures. Lots of Q&As. If we click into those, there are a lot of Q&As, all kinds of questions that people have asked me over the years, which I've tried to answer. If you don't find the answer here, just ask me a question and I will get back to you, because I check my Patreon every day. So anything you want to know, you can just ask me. And of course, you can also ask me in the comments below on YouTube. That's fine too. I am making much more of an effort to check my YouTube. So if there are any questions, I will get back to you. For example, at the moment, we are working on the girl with the dragonfly tattoo. So the ones at the top are the most recent. So this one is the one that's being worked on at the moment. So these are much more in depth than just a work in progress video, like the ones at the very bottom, which are old. These ones have hour-long tutorials, so every month there is a new hour-long tutorial, and this one's just building up over the time. So at the moment there are 5 hour-long tutorials. I'll show you one that is finished. So Ning feeding the fish is finished. And so this one was a long project, took many months to finish. So an hour-long tutorial each month, all the way, showing you how I created this piece of Ning feeding the fish. So if you would like to join me on Patreon, I would love to see you there. If you would like to follow me there are a few free tutorials. For example, the salty mermaid, which is coming out on YouTube slowly. There are 5 parts to that. The ones on Patreon are a little bit more in depth, because I like to try and keep my videos on YouTube a bit shorter. But if you would like to join me there, I would love to see you. You can ask me questions. As I say, you can also ask me questions on YouTube. That is absolutely great. But if you want to go and have a more in-depth look at the way I sculpt, I would love to see you there. And yes, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.